Hello, my name is Professor Richard Bayford, and today I'm going to tell you about a technique known as electrical impedance tomography. Let me give you a brief history. The first reported use of electrical impedance tomography, or EIT as we will term it, was in geological studies as much as 100 years ago. Tractors used to go over the fields with electrodes that stuck in the ground, and they would produce conductivity maps of the underlying structure. Today, we have industrial groups using identical techniques, and they look at bubbles in pipes or mixing, known as process tomography. There's even a group performing EIT on tree trunks to ascertain the internal structures of them. This is quite useful when you're trying to decide if a wooden telegraph pole needs to be chopped down or not without drilling into it and causes possible exposure to any disease that could come into it. Clinically, the EIT was originally known as applied potential tomography. However, more commonly, everyone calls it EIT or MFEIT. It has variations in its name, but most people accept MFIT as multi-frequency. Sometimes they drop the F. Sheffield back projection was the first algorithm that was used to reconstruct the pulmonary image. It's based on CT tomography. There are still groups today performing clinical studies based on this system, and they look at lung, brain, breast, and gastrointestinal. I want to show you some of the mechanisms we're looking, because underlying to the technique is bioimpedance measurements. So in bioimpedance, if we have a cell has a little membrane around it that doesn't allow the current to flow through, except when you increase the frequencies. So if the cells are small, in this case of cell swelling, we end up with the current flowing between the cells very easily. That's maybe during stroke. When stroke happens, the cells swell, the space between the cells is reduced, and the current has problems, or the ions, I should say, flowing between the cells has problems passing, and then we get an impedance change. And we can detect this using bioimpedance, and hence we turn it into an image, a so-called tomographic image. Another area is to look at cancer. Now, we can do static imaging, and we can do, which is the absolute, or we can do dynamic imaging. What we mean by static imaging, we measure the conductivity and we compare it between other tissue or other cancers and normal tissue. When the cells are normal, there's a gap between them, the ions can flow and the impedance is low. However, when you get a cancerous tumor, the cells become immortal, they don't die, they compact, and that space between them goes up, and you can detect by looking at profiles of the bioimpedance whether there's a tumor, maybe exciting, or putting a probe on. And when we use EIT, we can turn that into an image and a map. And there are groups working on trying to use this technique to do mass screening and mammography. Let me tell you a bit about the basic principles. It's a very simple principle, but there's lots of variation. We all remember V equals IR. So here we inject a current of 50 kilohertz. Doesn't have to be 50 kilohertz, but it's normally used to do that. And it's a constant current. Now, we place 16 electrodes around, can be more, and we measure the voltage profile across 2 of the electrodes. So if there's a change in impedance, maybe the lung air is moving, we see the change in voltage, which is proportional to the impedance, as I is constant. Now, what we do is we measure all the voltage profiles for one injection current, and then we move the current source around to another pair of electrodes, repeated. We generate 208 measurements if it's 16 electrodes, and we then do something known as reconstruction algorithm to turn that into an image. Is it tomography? Name agreed at the first Sheffield meeting in 1980s was not tomographic. Not possible to reconstruct image slice by slice. We can reconstruct a 3-dimensional conduct distribution and then display it on any desired slice. But unlike X-rays, ions, which is what we're measuring, that go through the body, cannot be confined to a plane, even by a system of electrodes that are placed externally. The first systems that we saw, although people would argue that there's the Webster camera, which is an array, but the first tomographic so-called systems were developed by the Sheffield group. This is the Sheffield Mark I, Barber and Brown, Brian Brown kindly gave me a picture which shows that there's a set of electrodes placed manually onto the body. There's two planes here. You can see the hardware, there's a series of cables there, and then a display showing the actual changes. There are variations on it. I'm only going to briefly go through this. This one is a breast imaging system. It works up to 10 megs. The patient parts prone, the breast hangs between the electrodes. The idea of a mammography system, which doesn't use ionizing radiation for screening, would be very encouraging. And then the currents are applied. They measure up to 10 megahertz and give you profiles of the tumor. This one, the idea was not to use electrodes. Electrodes are difficult to stick on sometimes. And this was the Graz system trying to use coils. However, you need a higher frequency range for the coils than you do with direct electrodes. And here is the combining MR with EIT, MR-EIT. You might ask why we use the most expensive technology with an EIT system. What's the benefits? Well, you can get information about the anisotropic properties of how the current flows, and you can bring this into priors. There are a lot of other reasons why it could be useful. Not generally found its clinical niche yet, but people are working on it in Korea and the US. I'm going to tell you more about lung imaging. Disorder of lung growth, maturation, and control of breathing are among the most important problems faced by neonatologists. The question is, how can we monitor unsedated neonates? We don't want to sedate them because we want to see what's happening when they're breathing normally. Non-assisted, so we don't want to massage the baby so we can see the breathing cycle, and we'd like the system to be wearable. So it's quite a key challenge. Here's an early system. We've got a medical grade power supply, a laptop, and here at the bottom is the EIT system, and it produces an image like this. So this is a dynamic image. I'm only showing you part of one image slice, and the color change represents the change in volume in air, not structure. So we go for a reference, and then we say how much air is changed in the lung, inspirational, expirational, and we can see the system on the child just lying on the side here. One of the issues with this when we first started working is you manually stick electrodes on the baby, and you can see the amount of clutter and cables and pipes, which is not practical when you're trying to use it with it in on a clinical ward and NICU, and you want to get in and do things. So we've been looking at ways of trying to build wearable technologies and multi-signal devices so you can combine all of these together, simply apply. We found with this system, we gave it to the clinical department. 30 seconds later, they put it on a shelf because they just got fed up with sticking electrodes on and making sure they worked properly. However, we have overcome that problem. I've been working on a project, Cradle. I won't display it here, but you can look on the website. Cradle was about taking this technology and moving it into the use in the clinical domain. And we measured 200 babies for 72 hours in real time, and we're able to show different clinical conditions. We also have used it for brain. Here's an example of a seizure. The patient has a series of electrodes stuck on. This is the little electrode box and the monitor side. This was 2 events during seizure. You can see the blue regions in different slices, axial, coronal, sagittal. So in event 1 showed the focus of the epilepsy, event 2, and it identified this focal epilepsy seizure points about 20 seconds before the manifestations of physical movement. Just briefly, because we don't really have time to go through all the ideas behind image reconstruction, there's a website that I can point you to if you're interested in that area. But image reconstruction, this is where, given the boundary voltage and the current J, we want to determine the conductivity from that information, and we need to know something about the structure. There is an inverse problem. Determine the conductivity from the boundary voltage. So this is given V and J inverse, find the conductivity. The inverse is non-linear. It's ill-posed inverse problem. and we have to do clever tricks by linearization, regularization. The forward problem, which we have to solve the inverse problem, predicts the boundary voltage from a particular estimation of conductivity. This is often achieved by a number of different methods, FEM and BEN, finite element method or boundary element, or even analytical methods, although humans don't come in perfectly symmetrical cylinders and spheres. So this is this given J and the conductivity. We solve this problem in the domain. The domain is the boundary of the shape, and we find the potential, but we're doing a reverse to work out what the reconstructed image looks like. I'm also going to tell you about a little bit of the other work that we're interested in doing. This was not so long ago we published this work. We've also found that we want to track drugs that go into the body. And to track those drugs, we put nanoparticles. I don't mean large particles. These are about 1.5 nanometers attached ligands in there. So we came up with the idea of, if we could measure the change in impedance due to the nanoparticles, then we could see where they were, where the drugs were going in real time. The thing is, these are so small, they don't give off, or they don't change the impedance very much. However, there's another property. When you go down to certain sizes, and you can do it with larger nanoparticles, smaller particles, if you excite them, you then get heat change. Now, EIT is very good at measuring impedance changes due to heat. So we thought, why don't we apply a radio field to the little ring, which we have as an EIT. This is 32 channels through a microwave coil, and then we'll reconstruct the image, see if we can find out where they go. So here's the ligand, and I should add that this is not like a little spherical lump. This is a small set of molecules, 57 capped, and then the ligands hang off. And the dipole, that's the charge mass on these ligands, causes this change. So I'm showing you the indication. Why do I want to work down this size? Because you can work at larger sizes, 20 to 70, because you need to get them through the kidney, and to get them to go into the cell, they need to be fairly small, ranges of below 5 nanometers, with a snorkeling effect that gets them in. We looked at another factor as well, because if we're going to apply a radio field, we'd rather not heat the body, because that's like a normal microwave, you stick something in. We'd rather only heat the nanoparticles, and we searched around for those nanoparticles. It depends on the size and what's attached to it in terms of the ligands. We found that the frequency for these particular one had a faster rate of change for heat gradient or thermal gradient at 2.599 gigahertz than the frequency is below or above. Now, they do heat at a faster rate, but so does everything else. So we chose a particular frequency that gave us the optimum range. Then we built a little setup which had the EIT system, and we put different types of nanoparticles within them and dropped them in. So here's one example. So we have something exposed to RF, and there's a small change in there, but that's because you get some slight heating, but we don't expose it long. Then we dropped the nanoparticles. Now, you can't drop them perfectly into a solution as a round circular blob, but we exposed it to that remains medium around it to allow conductivity, and hey presto, we were able to see a blob. We then went on and said, what happens if we do it with cells? Now, we have a way of targeting those particles just into cancer cells, but colorectal, and not into normal cells. So we exposed, we first of all created some cancer cells. We then spliced it in with some cell culture medium. Again, we'd like to grow normal cancer cells together, but that's not practical because the cancer cells send out a biomarker. That marker turns the cells, the normal cells, into cancer cells. So you have to do a kind of cut and paste for the experiment. And then what we did was we looked at whether there were any change in thermal effect with cancers, with the nanoparticles going into the cancer cells, and we found that we had an illuminated error when they went in. We did a wash off to make sure, because we looked to make sure that we had cancer cells, but with no nanoparticles. There's a small thermal gradient that's coming there, but we minimize the exposure. So there's a potential to track these drugs if they're attached to nanoparticles, or track biomarkers so that we can see how you can deliver them to the right target size. And that's the exciting area, because that means we could possibly target the payloads of drugs in real time in humans. Just to show you that we checked them out with fluorescence, just to make sure they were going into the cell lines as a gold standard, which uses FITSI to look at the fluorescent labels. We found they were in the right cells, so we then had a novel potential, and we're hoping to apply that to the lung to see if we can look at things like COVID drugs and respiratory drugs. So I'd like to acknowledge, because the work that's done, so this is the IEEE chapter that invited me to do this, EPSRC, which is a UK research council, and the EU, which was the Cradle project. And I will show the Cradle project at the end of this talk if there's time. Also, there's many people worked on this project with me, and so I'm just showing you a few of the people that contributed to the different aspects. Now, I appreciate this was a whirlwind snapshot through all this, and if you'd like to ask some questions, I'm quite happy to allude to more of the work that we're doing. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure and an honor to join the IEEE Day 2022 and share with you our research on prostate cancer diagnostics by quantitative ultrasound and machine learning. I'm Massimo Mischi of the Eindhoven University of Technology. I'm also the chairman of the IEEE EMBS Benelux chapter, and this research has been developed in tight collaboration with the Amsterdam University Medical Center, in particular with Professor Vaclav. I will turn off the camera so that we can focus more on the slides from now on. We focus on prostate cancer because of the relevance of the problem, being the type of cancer that is #1 for incidence and #2 for mortality. And also because of the current diagnostic limitations. Diagnosis is nowadays still based on invasive systematic biopsies with a sensitivity between 50 to 60%, and in particular with 3 out of 4 biopsies which are in retrospect unnecessary because no cancer is found, not to mention the cost of the procedure. More recently, multi-parametric MRI has gained quite some attention and is also advised as an imaging tool prior to biopsies. Still, about 40–60% of cases are in fact false positive, and there are still a large, well, quite some significant numbers of false and negative, also for clinically significant prostate cancer. The reproducibility is also still quite low between different centers, and of course MRI is expensive and the availability is quite limited. The basis for the research that we have carried out is, well, is angiogenesis, so the growth of this dense and irregular network of microvessels that feed the tumor such that it can grow beyond few millimeters. And this is also true for prostate cancer. So our goal, also supported by several funding agencies, was to develop cancer imaging techniques for the characterization of the microvascular architecture that is indeed characteristic of the presence of angiogenesis. But how can we detect the presence of angiogenesis in these microvessels that are few microns in diameter with an imaging technology such as ultrasound that doesn't have sufficient resolution? So the answer is in the use of ultrasound contrast agents. These are microbubbles that once they are invested by an ultrasonic field, they start oscillating in a non-linear fashion, in fact, and backscattering a lot of energy that we can detect without transducers in order to image the vasculature. And these agents are purely intravascular, so we can really image the vasculature by developing imaging technology that is very sensitive to these microbubbles. And this is possible by exploiting their nonlinear behavior by contrast-specific imaging sequences. And this is the full measurement chain that we developed. We can see it here step by step. We first inject a small bolus of ultrasound contrast agents. It's 2.4 milliliters of Sonoview in our usual protocol. After the injection, we will scan the prostate for a bit more than 1 minute in order to image the wash in and wash out of the microbubbles. So you see here the microbubbles washed in, and then slowly we will observe the wash out of the microbubbles. And what we do is that at each pixel we measure a time intensity curve. And the core of our technology is the analysis of all these time intensity curves that we measure in order to estimate their dispersion, their intravascular dispersion, which is reflecting the underlying microvascular architecture. So these vessels are too tiny to be resolved by ultrasound, but by analysis of the evolution of the concentration of microbubbles in time and in space, we can estimate the dispersion kinetics, which reflects the underlying microvascular architecture. In fact, the basic principle is modeling the kinetics of these microbubbles by a convective dispersion model. That consists, if we consider of injecting the bolus of microbubbles over here and detecting a second location, assuming that the dispersion of these microbubbles is dependent on the microvascular architecture and the multipath trajectories, well, the distribution of this cloud of microbubbles can be modeled as a Gaussian distribution that moves because of convection and spreads because of all this multipath trajectory. This will result in a certain shape of the time intensity curve, and the shape tells us about the ratio between convection and dispersion. So it allows inferring which is the underlying microvascular architecture. We also develop more advanced methods that are based on analysis of the similarity between neighboring curves, as this also reflects the amount of dispersion of the microbubbles through the microvasculature. And here are some examples of dispersion maps compared to the histology, and you can appreciate the agreement between the lesions as recognized by dispersion with the lesion that were detected on the histology, all highlighted in red color. But the most important study was actually performed on targeted biopsies, so biopsies that were targeted by contrast ultrasound dispersion imaging as well as by multiparametric MRI, and compared to systematic biopsy in 142 patients. Here is an example where a lesion could be clearly identified by multiparametric MRI, actually in all modalities, but the same lesion was also detected very clearly by QD. And in fact, both imaging techniques could upgrade this lesion from a Gleason 3+4 to a Gleason 4+3, and therefore even outperforming the biopsy result. And here is an overview of all the results, and in particular, I would like to drive your attention to the detection rate of clinically significant prostate cancer. As you can see, multiparametric MRI and QD could achieve very similar results, considering that multiparametric MRI is actually using multiple parameters with an expensive and time-consuming techniques, while QD is simply based on an individual ultrasound parameter. In total, we achieved a detection rate of clinically significant prostate cancer that was 39% for systematic biopsies, while this was 29% for multiparametric MRI and 28% for QD targeted biopsies. So in fact, these results suggest that although the two imaging techniques are quite alike, they are still not accurate enough to reach the same detection rate as systematic biopsies. And this could also actually be ascribed to the fact that the biopsies were performed by highly trained personnel. And this is, in fact, this number, 39%, is quite higher than the numbers that are usually reported for systematic biopsies in most of the multi-parametric MRI studies. Now, learning from multi-parametric MRI, what we did is also to develop, based on contrast-enhanced ultrasound, a multi-parametric approach, and we combine different parameters that can be extracted by analysis of contrast-enhanced ultrasound in order to improve the accuracy of our diagnosis. And in particular, we combine parameters that are related to dispersion, which are the parameters we just developed, with parameters that were already known and used that reflect the perfusion through the vasculature. This was done in 19 patients. We see here the parameters that provided the best results, like the washing time, but also the mean transit time and our similarity parameter. However, if we combine multiple parameters in a multi-parametric fashion using machine learning, Gaussian and mixture model classifiers, what we obtained is in fact a clear improvement, and we had an accuracy of 81% by using just 4 parameters, of which, as you can see, 2 parameters were in fact derived by QD. After developing a multi-parametric contrast-enhanced ultrasound method, we further expanded this concept towards a full multi-parametric ultrasound approach, which included not only parameters related to perfusion and dispersion, but also parameters related to tissue stiffness, so the mechanical characteristics of tissue, which can be estimated by shear wave elastography. We performed a study in 48 patients at the Martini Clinic in Hamburg. These patients received a BMO scan, as well as a contrast-enhanced ultrasound scan with QD analysis and shear wave elastography by the supersonic imaging system. The resulting maps were combined by machine learning and compared with the histological result. So all these patients were in fact referred for radical prostatectomy. And these are the patient characteristics. And in order to perform a proper validation, we had to register the histological results onto the ultrasound maps. For this purpose, we developed dedicated registration methods. And you see here how the contour of the prostate is here delineated, fused with the 3D model of the histology, and the final result is in this map where you can see the contour of the prostate based on the fused ultrasound and histological results, and based on the histology you see where cancer was in fact present. So by using this registration we could perform accurate validation of the method. We went even one step further. Well, we know that many of the features that we can extract from the prostate also depend on the zone. So there are differences in the mechanical properties of tissue depending on the zones in the prostate, and there are also differences in perfusion and dispersion. Therefore, what we wanted to feed to the classifier was also the segmentation of the prostate. This was done by developing a dedicated deep learning approach. And here is the full approach that we developed based on random forest classifiers. We had here the elastographic images, the dynamic contrast enhanced ultrasound images. We also had over here the segmentation, and what we obtain is in fact, and what we feed to the classifier is a number of QD parameters that we extract. And for each parameter, we also apply some radiomics. So we looked at the statistics of these parameters, and we also added, of course, the elastographic maps. And altogether, we had 84 parameters that were analyzed by our random forest classifier. And here are the results. And as you can see, the combination of the parameters leads to the best results. And if we look at aggressive cancer with a Gleason score higher than 3+4, then we obtain an area under the receiver operating characteristic curve that was higher than that was equal to 0.9. So this was a very promising result that we obtained by implementing a classifier based on a fully multi-parametric approach, combining dispersion parameters, perfusion parameters together also with elastographic parameters. As you can also see from the results, is in fact that the performance of our parameters based on the analysis of dispersion and our dispersion modeling were actually performing better than the other parameters individually. What is also interesting to observe is which parameters are selected by the classifier in order to achieve the best classification performance. And it's interesting to see that the classifier was mostly choosing complementary parameters related to perfusion, dispersion, and elasticity. And you see here the selection of parameters for the different zones, so the peripheral zone and the interstitial zone over here. In addition, an important step that we made is the extension of the method to 3D. This is very relevant, especially with the perspective of a clinical application, as by doing a 3D acquisition, we can analyze the full gland in one go. So just injecting a single bolus of ultrasound contrast agents, we can analyze the full prostate, while by 2D analysis, we have to inject one bolus for each plane that we wanted to analyze. So a faster clinical workflow, but also our models are by nature 3D models, and therefore also modeling the dispersion kinetics of ultrasound contrast agents in 3D leads to more accurate estimation. And you see here a good agreement between our dispersion map in 3D and the reconstructed histology in 3D. And this was a study that we developed thanks to the collaboration with the second affiliated hospital at Zhejiang University and Professor Pingtong Huang. Having the possibility of acquiring data in 3D also provided additional opportunities for the estimation of more parameters related to the contrast agent kinetics. And what we did was to, in fact, estimate also the velocity of these microbubbles, and based on that, apply tractographic techniques similar to what is usually used in brain MRI, where we could reconstruct the main blood streams in the prostate, as you can see here. And you see again how the higher density of vessels and blood streams, along with higher flows, has a good agreement with our CUDI map, 3D map, as well as with histology. So the opportunity of analyzing 3D data, again, provided us with the possibility of estimating a large set of parameters. So this study was done in 43 patients, and following the injection of a 2.4 milliliters of Sonovio as usual, and applying our analysis. Unfortunately, the histology was available only in few patients, so this study is compared to systematic biopsies. So what we did is to segment the prostate in areas depending on where the biopsy was taken. This was a 12-core systematic biopsy, what each patient underwent. And what we obtained by combination, so a multi-parametric approach that combines perfusion and dispersion features, is an area under the receiver operating curve, characteristic curve of 0.81 for clinically significant prostate cancer. So this was, again, very promising results, and underlines the fact that also in 3D, even though the volume rate is of course lower, we could still perform very accurate analysis. And you see here the comparison between individual parameters, like the velocity by our dispersion modeling, and here is the mean transit time of the agents compared to our Gaussian mixture model. So this is the result of the machine learning model that we developed. And you can also observe how we were even able to make a clear distinction, not only between insignificant and significant prostate cancer, also compared to benign tissue, but also with respect to benign prostate hyperplasia, as you can see by this significant difference over here. So this leads also to my conclusions. We have seen how QD, contrast ultrasound dispersion imaging, provides a promising biomarker for prostate cancer diagnosis. The development of the technique in 4D is feasible and facilitates even further the clinical application of the method. A multi-parametric approach combining complementary parameters related, for instance, to dispersion, but also perfusion, or even the mechanical characteristics of tissue in terms of elastography, improves the diagnostic accuracy. And of course, more extended validation is necessary and is also planned. And in fact, I like to mention the study that is now starting in collaboration with Thomas Jefferson University, in particular with Fleming Forsberg and Ethan Alpern, supported by the NIH, where we will apply this technique on a larger patient group. So we are really looking forward for the study. With this, I like to thank the collaborators that made all this research possible, in particular Professor Vaclav from the Amsterdam UMC, but also our collaborations with the second affiliated hospital at Zhejiang University, Professor Pingtong Wang, that made possible all the analysis in 3D, and Professor Solomon from the Martini Clinic in Hamburg, where we could perform the multi-parametric analysis combining contrast-enhanced ultrasound with shear wave elastography. And of course, all the many PhD students that supported and contributed to this research, as well as the funding agencies. And of course, thank you all for your kind attention.
Hello everyone, my name is Hasan Nashash and I'm a professor at the American University of Sharjah, and it gives me great pleasure to share with you our work in this area of vigilance assessment and enhancement. And let's begin with the outline of the presentation. First, we'll give some background and the grand challenge, followed by the hypotheses and the data acquisition and experiments. And towards the end, we'll show you some of the results obtained from the different experiments and the conclusion. This work was also conducted at 2 different universities, so there will be some acknowledgement. Some keywords for those who are not familiar with this area. When we say vigilance, we mean sustained attention to a particular stimulus over a prolonged period of time, and cognitive workload means it's the mental effort put forth by individuals in response to cognitive tasks. And cognitive efficiency is it's a measure of the interaction between accuracy and speed. So here on the x-axis we see cognitive workload from low to high, and on the y-axis we have cognitive efficiency, and the curve shows us that extreme low or extreme high cognitive workloads lead to a drop in cognitive efficiency, which is undesirable, of course. And the challenge for us is to search for the right cognitive workload in order to achieve optimum or maximum efficiency. Let me give you examples of low and high cognitive workloads. For example, the picture on the left here shows an accident of a lorry, and by the way, lorry drivers in UAE have serious accidents, and statistics say that lorry accidents were involved in at least 6% of the total accidents in the country and 16% of deaths. So it's, to us this is like a serious problem, and these accidents happen to a greater extent due to long driving without rest, and which may lead to a drop in cognitive efficiency. However, on the picture on the right side shows you someone who's driving, and at the same time they're maybe reading their messages or trying to text somebody. That increases the mental workload, which again will lead to a drop in efficiency, lack of concentration, and that may lead to accidents. So both are undesirable. In this research, however, we are mainly interested in the low cognitive efficiency, cognitive workload. And there are applications that benefit from this research. For example, as I said, the vehicle driving for long distances, airport baggage screening, somebody sitting waiting for a target to appear, diagnostic medical screening, air traffic control, security surveillance, those kind of jobs where there is very little challenge to the brain, and people will spend very long time staring at the screen or driving or whatever. So this may lead to, as I said, drop in vigilance and cognitive efficiency, and therefore bad consequences. There have been efforts, of course, by man to improve vigilance. There are conventional and unconventional methods. In the conventional methods, we can mention like meditation, yoga, mental training, martial arts, use of coffee, smoking, etc. However, there are more interesting and cool and conventional methods now that are being investigated by scientists, such as the use of pharmaceuticals, video gaming, multisensory stimulations, and electrical stimulations or magnetic stimulations. So those are still being investigated, and hence we went and looked at the literature, and we found there are so many of these methods. We're talking about, as I said, video gaming, direct current stimulation, haptic stimulation, cognitive workload modulations, etc. There are so many different methods, use of music, binaural beats, fragments, etc. The interesting thing that most of these methods actually led to some improvement in vigilance measured through the reaction time, and provided that the task is simple. However, when you compare these results to same methods when the task is a little bit more complex, then we have varying results. Varying results in the sense sometimes the use of these techniques may lead to drop in vigilance rather than increase. And for example, like maybe video gaming for school children, decrease their performance. Maybe too much gaming lead to developing attention problems and poor sleep quality. That's why you get conflicting results. So from this, the research objectives of our team were two. One, to investigate the effectiveness of alternative vigilance enhancement methods. And the second objective is to use some objective physiological signals such as brain EEG signals or functional near-infrared spectroscopy, looking at the hemodynamics of the brain, using other modalities like eye tracking also, in addition to behavioral measures like reaction time and maybe accuracy. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about 4 methods that have been used to enhance vigilance: cognitive workload modulation, tactile stimulation, audio stimulation, and binaural auditory beat stimulation. When I say cognitive workload modulation, I mean, if you remember the picture I showed you earlier about that curve where you have low cognitive workload, you get a drop in efficiency. So what if we increase the workload? That's the hypothesis. Say optimum cognitive efficiency may be achieved by enhancing or increasing the challenge into the stimuli. So we did an experiment where we exposed the subjects to human face preceded by some numbers, and we used 4 levels for cognitive workload levels. In level 1, we just asked the subjects to recognize the human face. In level 2, however, we say, human face is a target if it's preceded by like 2 odd numbers. So now there is more effort on the brain. And level 3 and 4, where the human face or the picture itself will have some noise with it. So when you show the picture of the face among many other pictures of varying, shapes or types, like showing landscapes or mountains or whatever, and your job is to distinguish or detect the human face from all of these different pictures. So there is there were like 3 different distinct workload levels, and it was tested using this protocol was tested using an experimental system which was composed of EEG, 64-channel EEG monitoring, eye tracking. As we said, we use also functional near-infrared spectroscopy, but I'm not going to talk about it in this presentation. And the EEG was from 64 channels, as I said, which is considered relatively a high resolution system. In addition to eye tracking, we use the iLink 1000 system to measure saccade velocity, saccade amplitude, and blink frequency. And in addition, of course, to these 2 major physiological signals, we looked at the subject data. We looked at, for example, some questionnaires like the NASA TLX questionnaire, reaction time, response accuracy. All of this data will help us to determine whether the vigilance is increasing or decreasing. The outcome of the experiment that I just explained showed us that the subjective test showed clear differences between the different tasks, the 4 tasks that I mentioned earlier on. 4 workload levels, 4 tasks led to clear recognition by the subjects that yes, I feel now there is more workload. We then looked at the peak saccadic velocity from the eye tracker, and again there was statistical significance to support the hypothesis that yes, workload modulation is indeed influenced by the level of the workload. And the EEG, we looked at also the event-related potential, ERP, from the EEG data. And again, there were 4 distinct patterns of the ERP signals which are associated with different workload levels. So we used this actually, we used the signals, the ERP signals, with various signal processing methods. We used the ordinary power spectral density. We use also a little bit more sophisticated method like the bilinear common spatial patterns or statistical measures. And they gave some interesting results. For example, the power spectral density and the BCSP methods gave us classification of the 4 different levels, varying in the case of PSD from 60 all the way to the 70s percent, while the bilinear common spatial pattern method, it gave us better classification, so something from the 80s to early 90s, which is considered not bad at this stage. However, when we use statistical techniques, statistical features, we got better results. If we compare this statistical with the other 2 methods, we have achieved much higher classification accuracy. So the features were able to classify the different workload levels. And actually, with the electrodes down to 24 electrodes, we were able to reach 90% accuracy. So there is a nice room here for investigation and signal processing. So this idea, after checking that yes, we can change the workload level, we did a small experiment where we asked the subjects to recognize some target, and the target is like this guy wearing a military uniform, and there were some distractors. The pictures on the right are the distractors, people wearing like black uniform or mixed black and green, and there is other like military, but it's not military. The target is the guy on the left. So the person watching a video, you know, as if they are in surveillance room, they were like waiting for this target to appear. And once we recognize, once we feel that the vigilance has dropped, we would initiate a more challenge in the screen. And the challenge in this case was by using like rain to make the signal to noise ratio of the image lower than the usual case. And we looked at the brain EEG and the eye tracking information, and we compared them before using the rain and after using the rain. So for example, here from the eye tracking data, in the first 10 minutes, there was a clear drop in vigilance as reflected by the normalized average velocity, saccadic velocity. But once we start showing these rain and the average velocity has increased, and these by the gray bars as shown here with the green curve. Similar results were obtained from the EEG, power spectrum density. Again, when you challenge the brain, with like noise or as I said, like rain in this case, the subject was more attentive, the vigilance increases. So again, this demonstrates that our hypothesis is verified. The other technique that we thought of using to enhance and increase vigilance was the use of other senses, like for example tactile stimulation. So here the experiment which was conducted by our student at the time involved driving a car or following a car, and every time you see red color here, you just apply a brake. And after driving for some time, of course, the vigilance will drop and the reaction time will increase. So if we use tactile stimulation, he has like vibrators, one in a glove, and when this tactile stimulation is used, we wanted to test whether that leads to enhancement of vigilance. And we tested that by the reaction time, as I explained. And the 3 bars here, bin 1, 2, and 3, show before at the beginning of the experiment, the reaction time was relatively short, indicating that we have relatively high vigilance. However, with time, in the green bar here, reaction time increases, indicating that vigilance has dropped. And when you use tactile stimulation, reaction time drops again, reflecting that yes, indeed, this is working, and tactile stimulation may also increase vigilance. A third experiment that we conducted was using audio stimulation, and here the experiment involved looking at the screen and trying to detect the color of the words rather than the word itself. For example, we're showing green but with color cyan, so the answer would be cyan. So there is a little bit of semantic challenge here, and this mental task here was used to monitor vigilance. And we show on the reaction time. The figure on the top shows the reaction time with audio stimulation and without audio stimulation. With audio stimulation, it's in blue. However, without audio stimulation, the reaction time is the red. So, for example, you see the reaction time without audio stimulation increases with time. As we do this experiment more and more words, you see the reaction time is increasing. However, when you use audio stimulation, the reaction time actually drops rather than increases, which is really interesting also. So it means audio stimulation does keep vigilance relatively high. We also tested audio stimulation with using like functional connectivity tests, and here the level 1, 2, and 3, we're talking about like the first 20 minutes, the second 20 minutes, and the third 20 minutes, like 20, 40, 60 minutes. The experiment took about 40 minutes. And A here means no stimulation, like the subjects with no audio stimulation. And the one at the bottom in B here, we have audio stimulation. And the functional connectivity, at least just by the picture, tells us that there was more connectivity in the case of audio stimulation between different regions of the brain, which is again an interesting observation that requires further investigation. We also even used some statistical tests. We looked at the t-value between the different states, between, like as I said, the first 20 minutes, second 20 minutes, last 20 minutes, and the results tell us, shows us that there is statistical significance that indeed audio stimulation does lead to vigilance enhancement. We also use binaural beat stimulations. This binaural beat stimulation applying two different frequencies, and we compared that to a single tone. It's interesting. Until now, not a lot of difference, but binaural beat stimulation also is effective, as shown by this picture. The red here, by the way, there's no tone, no binaural beat, but the blue and the green, using the single tone or binaural beat stimulation. And both curves show that the reaction time decreases with time, which is, again, supports the hypothesis. So in conclusion, we had used several experiments in our labs using different also physiological signals, behavioral measures, to test for different hypotheses of cognitive vigilance stimulation, vigilance enhancement. And of course, we are still working in this area, and more of the work to come. Maybe our future work will focus on like doing the experiment, but in more realistic work conditions rather than lab conditions. This work was conducted partially at the National University of Singapore and partially in our laboratory by the Neuroengineering Research Group at the American University of Sharjah. This is where we reside. This is in United Arab Emirates, here in the Gulf. And there were many people involved in this work. Endo, Budala, Yuki, Professor Tucker, Faris. There are many people, many students who were involved in this research work. So I'd like to thank all of them for their contribution. I'd like to thank the American University of Sharjah and the National University of Singapore for supporting this work. And also I'd like to thank IEEE EMBS for giving us this opportunity to speak about our work. Thank you so much, and if you have any questions or would like to talk more about this research, I'll be more than happy to communicate with you. This is my email address, so please don't hesitate to drop me an email. Thank you, and God bless you. Bye-bye.
Hi. Thanks for having me today for EMBS chapter Torch Relay Public and for IEEE. My name is of Kremen, and I'll be talking about how AI can enhance the current brain sensing and stimulation devices. I'll be using some examples of published publications that we've done, and it will be for Czech and Slovak section of IEEE in cooperation with US parties as well. Here is my funding and disclosures. So today I'll just briefly frame my presentation into the context, and the main portion of presentation I want to spend on show you examples of latest AI stuff that can be used in brain sensing stimulation devices, and then we can think of what can be the next future of these devices and AI being used in these devices. So here is our use case. Of course, brain sensing stimulation is for multiple diseases today, including tremor, Parkinson's disease, epilepsy. Those devices usually are implanted somewhere in the human body with electrodes targeting some brain regions, most likely. The devices can be mounted either on the head and skull, or can be mounted on the chest, but the electrodes always lead to the brain. That's where we talk about brain sensing and stimulation devices currently. Some of the new devices also has a subcortical recording, and then some devices emerging in latest years has subgalial recording. They don't have stimulation usually. I'll use examples that we've made in epilepsy. So just want to lead this by statement why we use these devices in epilepsy, and that's usually used for people that are drug resistant, and the operation is not the treatment for them. So the only way that's available is to try the brain stimulation and sensing devices. But current technology has a lot of limitations. Those patients are really seizure free, and their reporting of seizures is really inaccurate, as has been shown in multiple studies in recent decade. So it's really very important to have some gold standard for driving the treatment on how many seizures patients really have, and this varies patient by patient. So here we need also the individualist care. The flexibility of current stimulation devices and how they drive the therapy and change the control of the brain by electrical stimulation is really limited currently. Some of the devices even doesn't have sensing, so the physician has to go and set and change the settings based on patient subjective reportings. And those devices that they have sensing, they have sensing maybe limited in the device itself. So they can sense maybe some episodes, but they don't store all the data usually. So that's another big limitation of those devices. And last but not least, seizures in general are very thought to be predicted. So tough to be predicted. So it's very difficult to know when the next seizure happened for the patient. It'd be very, very, very good for patients if we will be able to find some models for prediction. And that's again the big field last few decades. A lot of research groups working towards that goal, either from brain signals or even now currently from variables. So what is the system that would be kind of ideal to have today? We have patient here implanted with brain stimulation device electrodes leading to some targets in the brain, and that the device can relay the information to some variable wearable device that can stream the data up to the cloud. And then we have physician on the other side, and the physician could see the same cloud and same data streams from the patient and have some analytical platform where they can see all the data and they can analyze the data and the seizures and other data that can guide the therapy. And of course, in some cases, they need to see a really detailed data sets where they need to see the raw data and some seizures and their frequency components, like it's shown here in the spectrogram. And then they might also do some more advanced analytical stuff. So they can have for example, a AI system that will pre-analyze the data for them, extracts features from the data like you can see here, and then based on those features, it can even cluster the data and give physicians some insight into the data, the insight that's normally not visible from the raw data sets. And then, this all, why is it useful? This all is really useful if you can close the loop between the patient and physician and guide the therapy by this data. So we really are talking about a system that's embedded in the device or distributed, but it enables to close the loop between physician and the patient to optimize the therapy for the patient. We've been working on systems with current devices that can enable us to have this information from the brain of the patient, and most of the stuff that's published here in Sladky's paper, and you can read it in detail if you are interested, is based on the deep learning. So we stream all the data from the patient to the cloud, and then the cloud has a generalized multi-species seizure detector that enables to detect seizure on the fly. And so any data arrives in the cloud, seizure detector runs through this and say, this is not seizure, this is the seizure, and mark those seizure events, which then physician can review and analyze. This detector is very precise, so I encourage you to read the paper if you are interested. And the cloud has another detectors, for example, interictal epileptiform discharges. In epilepsy, these are kind of like big transient events, short events in between seizures that can be of interest for a physician. So we have the detectors running in the cloud and quantifying and parameterizing those epileptiform activities, and then enables physician to see any overview of these events, how rarely or frequently they occur, and so on. And this all physicians can see longitudinally in time, so they can see the development of those events. Here you can see physician looking at the cloud, one seizure here, and those red dots are spikes before the seizure, the epileptiform discharges, and then they can see how these epileptiform discharges changes throughout the day and night and during the different sleep cycles, and they can also see it related to the seizures. So another example I'd like to talk about, is using implantable devices that are only collecting the data. So they didn't have a stimulation option, but they were able to collect each data set of the data and either predict or optimize the therapy for the patient, the medical therapy. And these long data sets were collected by Dr. Cook and his team from Melbourne. The main paper was published in Lancet Neurology 2013. I really encourage you to read that one. It's really awesome technology back then that enabled the boom of advances. That group published a lot of really interesting papers since then on this data set, and we had a chance to work with the data set using machine learning techniques to make some observation in long-term data that hasn't been shown before. And we were partially looking on how seizure likelihood varies with day-to-day, and how is it related to sleep of patients that has epilepsy. If you are interested in reading this paper in more detail, you can find it. It's from Katrina Dell and the team, and it was published in Clinical Medicine in last year. And on most of the slides I'll be talking about will be based on this paper. So just so you know how the data were collected for this paper, we had patients, 15 patients, implanted with Neurovista device by Mark Cook and his team, same as in his paper, and we used the same data set. The patient had strip of electrodes implanted subdurally on the surface of the brain over hopefully epileptic zones. Some of them are non-epileptic, but most of them were epileptic zones, so the seizures could be observed there. And those electrodes were connected to the device and saved in the device and then streamed out of the device, and were continuously measuring the data, spanning 350 days up to like 750 days for each patient. And here you can see the data in panel A, where here in red you can nicely see the seizure going, and this is the data before the seizure is happening. But what we were interested at to look at how the data look like in different sleep states. So here you have the data sorted based on the sleep state, so you can kind of see the sleep state usually is differentiated into few phases. Non-REM sleep is the phase where you sleep and then sleep deeply, and then the REM phase is the rapid eye movement sleep when people are thought to have dreams. So here you can kind of see non-REM phases and how the data looks like, the deep waves and so on, versus the REM phase here down, where it's a little bit more shallow and like quiet awake-like activity. And if you look into the PSD, power spectral density of this data, you can clearly see the differences. Here in colors, you have yellow wake, red REM, blue, black, non-REM sleep stages. You can kind of see that wake and REM has really low power and lower frequency bands here compared to the non-REM stages. So this was our input for our machine learning approaches that we were going to use. And because this data had no gold standard sleep scoring, which means we don't have any reference of how sleep could look like, and at this data we had to come up with some different approach. So we used the raw data and feature extractions from this data, and we used the expert, or we presented the expert data sets. We selected the electrodes that are close to standard sleep scoring electrodes. Of course, they are on the surface of the brain, so that's different than gold standard sleep electrodes. But we were able, to select the training set of 10 days that expert nicely could, in a reasonable short time, evaluate and assess the classes of the behavior. So it was sleep, non-REM 1, 2, 3, and REM categories. And then we did it for 15 patients, so we ended up with 150 days of data scored by the expert for the whole data set. And then we used it for training individual classifier for each different patient. And then we got the final classification of all days of each patient that were recorded. So in some case, over 150 days. And this is how one night looks like. That's the result of the classifier. So you see, 8 p.m. till 12, patients still awake, and going down, starting sleeping, having deep sleep, following REM, and then in the morning, then they have few cycles through the night, and then in the morning they awake, and then somewhere during the day they could also have some little naps, so they slept even during the days, of course, in normal daily schedule. And what we were able to see in this big data set, and this is showing all 16 patients, is here in blue you have blue sleep onset, yellow shows sleep offset, so it kind of shows you the night of the patient for each patient, and then in red you see the probability of having seizures for these patients. So in each patient you can kind of compare when the seizures happening related to the sleep states or to the sleep. And when you plot this information a different way, you here on the x-axis you see the patient 1 through 15, and you see the proportion of seizures per sleep state, and again colors showing different sleep states, and you can kind of see the distribution of seizures happening in each state for each patient. If you aggregate the data over all patients, you can see it here, and you can also see the duration of each seizure stratified per each behavioral states from wake to REM. What enabled this was very interesting finding. If you look at these graphs, then you can see in colors again the sleep states. The gray color shows the days where we weren't certain about the classification of the behavioral state that can happen, if there are packet drops or noise or something like that. But overall, in first column, you see the control state, which is normal nights aggregated across patient, and in proportion of each sleep category. And then you see how it changes when the seizure happen in wake or during the sleep. And you can clearly see that the seizures are altering the distribution of sleep and even the length of sleep. Here again, you see it for each patient, and you can kind of see the differences between patients as well. But overall, you can see the length of the sleep after seizure and distribution of sleep states is different. So this was the very first study that used EEG to investigate the interaction between day-to-day deviations in sleep duration and seizure occurrence. And the seizure probability changes with day-to-day variation in sleep duration. Following a seizure, patients slept for longer duration, and if a seizure occurred during sleep, then sleep quality was also reduced with increased time spent aroused from sleep and reduced rapid eye movement sleep. And we showed that an increase in sleep duration by average was hour and 30 minutes, over hour and 30 minutes or more, and was associated with 27% reduction in the odds of seizure in the following subsequent 48 hours. Interestingly, for most patients, reduced sleep duration did not indicate facilitative role in the generation of seizures. So so if they slept less, they didn't have more seizures, for example. These results could suggest that increasing sleep duration is beneficial for patients with epilepsy, reducing seizure risk. We are open and sharing our tools, so some of the tools I was talking about you can find in our Mayo lab, and then we are very active in Open Mind Consortium that works around the neural stimulation hardware platforms. So feel free to reach out there. And I have to thank to all the co-authors that be hard to mention in list here because it's so many people working on that. But if you start reading the papers, you will see the co-authors and acknowledgements there. And thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Okay. We'll begin with the presentation. And the title is iOpth, Smart Techniques and Strategies for Ophthalmologists and AI Perspective. My name is Wais Qitwai, Professor of Computer Engineering at Kapodistrian University. And I'm really grateful for the for being given this opportunity to share my research interest, which is relevant to both IEEE and EMB audience, and specifically with this occasion, which makes a lot of sense to highlight such effort. First of all, ophthalmology. Kind of a strange area to work in. Ophthalmology is derived from two Greek words, ophthalmos meaning eye and logia meaning the study or discourse. Hence, the study of eye is what we call ophthalmology. I was not really interested in this until two things happened. One, some of these drawings that you see on the right are from a Muslim scientist, Ibn al-Haytham, also known as al-Hazen in the Western literature. A 10th and 11th century Muslim scientist of the golden era of Abbasids. He was a polymath, that's called a person who has contributed and achieved a lot in various fields of mathematics, biology, physics, etc. One of his really great work is on the structure, how the function, I would say physiology and the structure of human eye, how the eye work, and based on that, the very first primitive form of today's camera was developed. So that took my attention, and then this slide goes to the people who actually made me work in this field of ophthalmology. First acknowledgement goes to my brother, Dr. Omar Khidwai, who is an eye surgeon and has worked in 3-4 different countries on various eye-related problems and diseases, and that's where he has instigated some interest in me to apply the computing techniques with the data that he and his team. So the team members, Dr. Raja and Dr. Ben Burton from the James Paget University in UK, Dr. Gokulan Ratanarajan from the Queen Victoria, and then these two guys, Dr. Riyad Malik and Dr. Yanis from the Weill Cornell University in Qatar. So all of these guys, I'm really grateful to them for bringing this wonderful world of ophthalmology into my radius of studies, and of course grateful to my students, a couple of students whose work is being presented, or part of their work is being presented as the culmination of the experience in ophthalmology that I have gained in past few years. So iOpth, that's the name I have suggested, which is application of intelligent techniques in ophthalmology. The scope that I would like to present today is related to these four areas where we have applied artificial intelligence techniques and have found some interesting results and strategies that might help other people coming in future to work on similar areas or similar problems. So retinopathy, neuropathy, macular degeneration, and glaucoma, four probably very commonly known eye conditions that people are aware of and would like to know how to basically solve the critical issues related to them. These contributions have been published, and I can provide you with the full citation if needed. So, how is ophthalmology more challenging to someone like me who's in computing area? Well, the biggest problem is to find a collaborator in the field of ophthalmology. Doctors' willingness. These doctors are extremely busy, and not only because of the schedule, but because of the occupation of their thought process, even outside of the operation room or outside of the hospital. They keep thinking about it. So it's really hard to find them free enough so that you can get their thoughts and get their feedback on the things that you are trying to do with them. The data availability is also sometimes very scarce. So in our case, two of the cases that I would present are really done on very small data sets because that's the only thing available. And one of the things that you need to get the data is either get the patient's consent, go through the IRB, or we found another way of dealing with some of the anonymized data sets is to go through the data in the audit form, the audit data protocols. And some of the hospitals do support them. That makes the data publicly available and becomes easier for us to use for different AI-based techniques. However, the data size is always a big challenge. Most of the clinical studies that I have seen, the data size is not big at all. I'll share some of the sizes as we go along. So, AI right away, the first thing that comes to mind, oh wow, let's do convolutional neural network or VGG or DenseNet. Just name those, or Google Net. Just name some of the well-known or very big networks. But they need a lot of data, and so unless if you're doing the partial training and something similar to retraining a network, you are basically stuck with a small data set which will not be sufficient for training an original fully developed network. So that's one issue. The data is usually in the form of images, and for working with images, you have only two options. Either you work with the image as is, as a raw data set, using deep learning protocol, which requires at least 3,000 to 4,000 images for training purposes, etc. Or you are using the images with features, so you need to come up with a very good feature set that can be used with machine learning algorithms for classification, for grading, for segmentation, etc. In addition to the images, clinical measurements which are either qualitative or quantitative data set, are also available sometimes, but they are very short data sets, and we have worked with them with machine learning algorithms. So one of the finding that I'll present uses DenseNet and compared it to the mobile net, which is now talking about the use of images directly, which is with the deep learning scenario. However, with images converted into features, we found ANFIS, or Adaptive Neurofuzzy Inference System, to be very successful with small data sets. Let's start with the first application, which is lightweight deep learning retinopathy classification. The retinopathy is the damage of the retina due to prolonged diabetes. The patient with diabetes, they suffer many different type of breakages and damages in the different parts of the body. One very critical one is the eye, and they lose eyesight. The impairment of the eyesight because of high sugar level in the blood causes several different types of degenerations, several types of defects in the eye. So diabetic retinopathy, or DR, has a wide spectrum. So the spectrum that we're looking at from no DR to proliferative DR, which is, not only it's very high, but it's also expanding very, very fast. So very aggressive in nature. What does a DR view look like? So I'm not sure if any one of you is into scouting, Boy Scouts, but this is Gilwell, the birthplace of many of these scouting activities in UK. And the famous song "Back to Gilwell, Happy Land" might be resounding in somebody's mind if they have gone through the wood badge training. Anyway, so I found this picture as a good memory refresher. If I look at this scene, this is how a normal no DR person would look like. Now, as the diabetic retinopathy increases, things start changing. The way we have simulated is through convolution with several different types of Gaussian kernels with light intensity adjustments according to the level of severity. So as you can see now, the details in the image are slowly disappearing. The intensity levels are then further supported by these short range, limited Gaussian kernels again that obscure a particular portion of the image, hides it, and the information is gone. That whole effect now start becoming more proliferation oriented, becoming very, very aggressive until the patient reaches the level of complete blindness. So these are certain stages that we are looking for. The various reasons why these things happen are well known in the ophthalmology community, as well as on those people who have been working with images. So aneurysms, which are small red dots that appear, then exudates. These are small cotton-like blinding spots that appear here and there. Then they become very hard. The blood flow, the fluid flow becomes very, very obscured there. And then in the end, hemorrhages start appearing, which really covers most of the view, or the sight view, with blood. So that's where blindness is kind of just around the corner. So the eye images with no DR and with severe DR, you can see that the damages are there. And these are silent killers, by the way. They just happen over the period of time, and people don't understand or realize. The only thing we can do is go to the ophthalmologist. They will look up in the in your eye through the fundus imaging, and based on the experience of the ophthalmologist himself or herself, they will be able to assess and come up with a grading of the damage so far. The idea behind this work was to come up with this handheld device, which are now commonly available nowadays with applications, etc., that can take with a fairly good accuracy an image of your fundus. The retinal image can be obtained by a device like this, which is not very expensive now and available. The idea was that specifically this work was done during COVID, where many patients were not able to come to hospital. They were not allowed to come for regular checkups, etc., because everything was quarantined and so on and so forth. So can they do it at home? Can they just take a picture with this device, and then the application will take care of this image automatically, giving an advice or recommendation to the patient as well as to the physician at the same time. So that was the starting point of our work. Image acquisition, then some of the pre-processing to clean the image, bring that required area into the focus, removing the background, etc., etc., and then using the machine learning the deep learning algorithms to classify the severity of the damage. In order to build this system, we used initially the DenseNet platform, VGG16, with some of the available databases like IPAX, Aptos, and Messidor, data sets, and then we built upon them using DenseNet 1-to-1, VGG16, and then our target was mobile net, so that can we bring this whole intelligence to this device instead of relying on something on the cloud. This is an app-based system that can reside in your own phone and be able to work with the local data set, local images without having a need to go to the network. So from this data set, we kind of selected the images. We made them pass through these three different networks, and after a lot of parameter fine tuning and parametric readjustment, this was the final network detail for the mobile net, which we finalized, and we found it to be all of these details are available. And if anybody is interested, please feel free to contact me, and I can provide you with the details of that. Comparison of the accuracy and area under the curve for the accuracy. The mobile net came very close, actually superior than the dense net, which was the best standard at that time when this work was done about a couple of years ago. So mobile net performed marginally ahead of this dense net, which gave us a confidence that now we can actually put this in a mobile phone, and the person can actually use this at home. Now, ultimately, this thing was converted into a sort of an app. So you have to add some of the first the IP address to connect your phone to the network, or just for the connectivity purposes. And then you select an image from the captured images, and then once the image is selected, it is given to the system, and the system works on it, applying the AI system and giving you a decision that this is a moderate DR. So probably it's safe to be where you are, and no need to panic and go to the hospital at this point. But when it reaches to stage 4, the recommendation would be to go to see the doctor right away. This was one work in ophthalmology, and we developed this app for the doctors to use. And then next one is the neuropathy. Another thing that happens because of several different types of disease, including diabetes again, multiple sclerosis or MS, Parkinson's, stroke, etc. All of these are, one of the many reasons for creating what we call these nerve losses, damages in the nerves. So in the body, there are two types of nerves. One are called the large nerves, and the other one are small fiber nerves. Long fiber nerves are the small fiber nerves. The long fiber nerves can be detected because of loss of sensation. You find ulcers in your foot, so you can see those visible effects, and then you said, "Oh, okay, something is wrong." But by the time that happens, the small fiber nerves are already gone, so it's too late. To detect the small fiber nerve loss, there are certain medical procedures which are, you have to go there regularly and keep doing all of these, pen prick type of testing, and automatic sensory testing, or electrophysiology, or skin biopsies. Nobody would do that on a regular basis. It's not really like a visit to the dentist. It's more than that, and it requires a lot of commitment, and a lot of effort has to be made on behalf of the patient. The other possibility is a new technique that my colleagues in Cornell University came up with, and that's corneal confocal microscopy, or CCM. What it is, it's basically a corneal microscope which actually goes all the way and touches the cornea, and then the various setting of the microscope will give us different layers and different features in those layers. What we are looking for are the nerves, this whole area of the nerves in human cornea. Specifically, these 5 areas, that's which we call the central area, and while this one is the inferior whorl area, which also contributes to various features that can be used for determining whether there is nerve loss damage or not. Why eye? That was the question here. I mean, we talked about, and I showed you the picture, which is the foot. Mostly these small fiber losses are there, but the old saying, eyes are the windows to the heart, but here eyes are the windows to the nerves as well. Any changes, any damages that are happening in the body in the small fibers can reflect, they do reflect in the corneal nervous system. So that's why we can, a very non-invasive procedure, very easy to be performed, the CCM imaging, and based on that, determining whether the nerve has been damaged or not. It's really a remarkable idea. So looking at the images from the microscope, these are the type of images that we are talking about. The central area, the inferior whorl area images, and out of that, this layer, which we call the subbasal nerve plexus, this was selected based on the doctor's opinion that this is where most of the damage can be seen very clearly. So there were other images as well, like endothelial cells and stroma cells. We didn't talk about that. We didn't care of that for them, but we just took the subbasal nerve plexus layer and we started working with them. So the way ophthalmologists work, the researchers in ophthalmology work, they will use some kind of software, and they would, based on the doctor would, based on their own understanding, will make lines called the manual tracing. Based on the manual tracing, the length of these lines are calculated by the software, which tells us, based on the statistical measurement, whether there is this much nerve loss or not. What we are trying to do is to make it automatic. We take the image, and all of these tracings should be done through image processing, through AI, and a grading should be provided based on the understanding of the system. The first challenge was to really isolate these nerves, the white lines. So we tried different things. We tried all the various type of morphological operation, but not very clear. Well, it was somehow a kind of a diffuse sensitivity in that image that was preventing us from getting very good results. So at that point, UNet based convolutional neural network was used to provide the segmentation based on, again, very experienced doctors, and they were able to trace out several images for us, and that's what we use as our target images to train the rest of them. And it gave us an interesting um, map of the eye using a lot of different types of combination, variation, etc. Our images are all real images. They're not from any publicly available data set. So those were diabetic patients in the hospital. Their images were obtained with their consent, etc. But we're talking about, say, 68 patients here, 9 patients here, 101, and we're talking about roughly 200 images only, 200 patients, and everything has to be worked on this. So many of the AI critics will object to that because the number is very small, and really it's not really convincing in terms of application of real deep learning networks. So we did not apply deep learning. What we did, once we had the segmented image, we calculated the feature called NFL, the nerve fiber length. The nerve fiber length was calculated in two ways. One was the full image was calculated for nerve fiber length, which means we just basically add all the white pixels here that will tell you the total length of the nerve fiber. And then the whole image was divided into different segments, and those segments were critical from the doctor's point of view. So if the density in this second segment is less than 10% of the normal density, then there is a definite loss of nerves in that region. So neuropathy is definite there, etc. Using that with a well-known technique called ANFIS, adaptive neurofuzzy inference system, an old technique, but we applied in a different way. We did some modification in the in the way the rules are selected, in the way the membership function is selected, and those provided us with a good trained version, which was then evaluated against first the segmented image, and then the original image, which was hierarchically predicted into first normal and add not normal, then if not normal would divide into uh, severe, less severe, and more severe, less severe, and more severe, further divided into 2 and 2. So we got all these various 5 different categories. Again, applying all of the various statistical measures on that, we found that this unit based NFLs were really, really useful feature for us. So anyone who's willing to work with these images, I would really recommend exploring good techniques for segmentation. UNet is one of them, and come up with better lines in the image, removing the rest of the border. You might have seen here the images that we took. They have all of these various types of artifacts, these wave fronts, these twisted lines, and the focal effect, etc., blurring effect. All of these were there, and UNet was able to work with it even in spite of that, which was a big success for us. Anyway, moving on, we we compared our results and NFIS with SVM, with naive based classifier and KNN, and also with GoogleNet. So with GoogleNet, we just used the transfer learning approach, so that part of the layers were frozen and trained, and part of them were unfrozen, etc. In all the cases, we found the NFIS to be the most accurate version. Okay, and it has some demerits, and it's not very fast. It's not as fast as, for example, KNN in terms of training or in terms of evaluation. It is probably the fastest one, but in training it takes longer, and so on and so forth. There are other also, the size of the model, the final model that we get. Probably the best one is SVM, because SVM is a very linearized model, so it's only 21 kilobyte for the same size of images that we were using. NFIS was somewhere in the 70K range, which is bigger than that, but it is still comfortably it can be comfortably hosted or housed inside a mobile device, and it can work without the use of a cloud-based service as well. The third application, which I'll go through very quickly, is related to a very, very, very unique population in the area of Great Yarmouth in UK, because that town has majority of the people whose ages are above 85 years of age. So it's very senior citizen. And one of the things that they face is what we call the macular degeneration. The connection between the retina and the optic nerve, they start drying off, they start breaking off. And there are treatment to that, which is called these injections, which are called the VEGF injections. And the patient have to come to the hospital. They put these injections 1, 2, or 3 at the same time in one visit directly into the eye, and that medicine that goes in tries to overturn the degeneration process. But it was seen that even after a whole year of treatment, maybe the results won't come out as expected, and you can imagine the amount of discomfort the patient has to go through visiting the clinic all those times, and at that age, that's also a very, very discouraging factor. So what we thought, let's do something to at least reduce this amount of effort that they have. So what we did, we took the measurements at the baseline when they came, and after the first couple of doses and fourth month. And using those two values only, we were able to come up with a model that could predict where will they stand in terms of the improvement at the 8th month or after a year. And surprisingly, the results were really interesting. This paper has been cited now many, many times, in a very interesting paper. And because it deals with a population which is really a really unique data set. And we found that with NFIS again, we were using some of the clinical measurements, which was visual acuity, VA, and the macular thickness through the clinical measurement that were made through the imaging. And used after that the NFIS system, so we took the values, made them into groups, and then groups were subjected to fuzzy rules, and then fuzzy rules were converted into final results through fuzzy implications, etc. The regular procedure. I'm not going to go into the details of the procedure. It's very well documented in the papers. The references are available if anybody is interested. And we found that the data that we have used they came very close. This is the training data set. Similarly, testing also came out to be very, very positive. And then we compared it with simple models like the linear regression model, linear predictors of different types. Turned out to be the error that we got in ENFIS was really, really insignificant compared to the error that we got in other linear model. And that gave us the confidence to come up with another app. So what we have started is this Ophnosis series of apps. Hopefully soon they will be published once we get all the approvals done. So in this app, you can you can input the baseline age, visual acuity, and the macular thickness in the beginning. Then after 4 months of treatment, you put the visual acuity and the macular thickness. Again, based on these values, the model that we have developed will tell you what will be the visual acuity and macular thickness, and whether it's good, fair, or bad. Accordingly, the prognosis can be given. So the patient as well as doctor can get a course idea of what should be their further course of action next immediate future. And the last one that we are working on is something related to glaucoma. The glaucoma is an imbalance of certain fluids in the eye, which creates a pressure, unexpected pressure on the visual channel of the eye, which ultimately results in blindness because it damages high pressure damage. So the old method was to do a surgery, cut out these vessels, and then keep draining the liquid through that. The new version, you don't have to do an open surgery. You have just as an entry with a duct-like device, a kind of a shunt that bypasses this fluid into a drainage channel within the eye, and the glaucoma pressure can be stabilized. Again, there are 4 types of such treatments called MIGS, minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries. Which one is the best? And the studies have shown that all of them have different behaviors with the patient. So what we did, we took these 4 very well-known techniques: ICE2, pressure flow microshunt, Zen 45, and iStent, and all of them use some kind of a stent, which typically looks like this, and you can imagine the sizes are in micrometers and very small sizes. And the input feature set that we used were ages of the patient, again, the visual acuity, and this time the pressure, the intraocular IOP was used because that is the one that is a critical factor that defines the glaucoma and the extent of glaucoma related damage, and some other visual field of mean deviation. And then some other parameters were that how many medications are being used, etc. So those were also used. The type of glaucoma was the output because that's what we came up with. So what category of treatment should be used? So again, with many different measurements, we found that our accuracy was within the range of 90 to 93%, which was quite accurate. And ultimately, we also, again, the technique we have used is ANFIS, Adaptive Neurophysiology Inference System. I did not go into details of this because this work is still under review, and there's a good chance it get published soon, inshallah. So just a brief overview of the idea. Again, the app. So input values entered. As soon as you're done compute, it will tell you recommended form of the treatment from one of the 4 treatment methods. Well, that's about it for this this topic and my experiences which I had gathered with my team in past few years. So there is a second acknowledgement slide which really is due for the IEEE EMBS Chapter Development Committee for 2022. Was I would really like to congratulate them in organizing this event and reaching out to so many people in the world for contributing and getting their voices heard through their platform. My email is listed here. Any question or any references needed, please feel free to write to me. I would like to add a very special thank to a very special friend, Professor Liu Kwan, who was the contact person who reached out to people and invited us for these talks. So many thanks, Professor Lee. I hope to see you soon, maybe in some conference. Thank you.
everyone, my name is Ilaria Cinelli. I am the IEEE EMBS European representative. My activities mostly refer to the European region. However, I have a great mission, and this is about introducing more space in society. I love space, I have a background in space, I work in space and in healthcare, so I thought like, okay, why not? Probably it's going to be good for the member. My background is in biomedical engineering. I have a bachelor, master, PhD, postdoc in biomedical engineering, but I've also done a lot of research projects in the field of space medicine and analog mission, and I will try to mention a few of them to you today. And that leads me to become a fellow of the Aerospace Medical Association and a fellow of the Aerospace Human Factors Association. I have several duties even in other non-profit organizations, as I think sharing is extremely important for sustaining and supporting the progress of our society. And in healthcare, you know, I'm doing my work. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit particular, and mostly people don't think about that there are healthcare applications in space, but actually they are. And I am full-time right now at AIKO. AIKO is an Italian-based company. We are specialized in artificial intelligence techniques, and there serves to increase autonomy in space missions. So we want to make space assets autonomous, but also we want to produce technology that includes artificial intelligence for supporting and sustaining human life in space. And this is my daily job. This image is the Global Exploration Roadmap, and it is about a few years ago. It summarized the international objectives of Space Agency, and now it includes also commercial activity. You know, it is quite hard to conduct space activity thinking that just one entity would, you know, would lead it or would become successful. In the space sector, international collaboration is extremely important because some challenges about space exploration cannot be supported by one entity, but not just because they are very expensive, but because they are extremely hard to resolve and to address. So international collaboration is key. Here you see that you know, we are going to go back. Actually, we're going to go forward to the moon, as we see here in the European region, and now we're going to go back to Mars. And the Artemis program, which is run by NASA, is just about to start, so I look forward for that. In this image, you see the objectives of human exploration activity on the surface of the moon. So the gateway is like the ISS, it will orbit around the moon, while there are going to be other activity, other cargo and, you know, facility on the surface of the moon that would allow astronauts to carry on exploration activity during lunar night and lunar day. I'm not sure how many of you knows, but a lunar night is about 14 terrestrial days, and it is very particular. It's a very important thing to know, because exploration, as we know, and the most, you know, safe part of the exploration can be carried out during lunar day, and so 14 terrestrial days, while during lunar night the extreme environmental condition introduce so many challenges in the setting of an operation that it's quite hard to address. But for the moment, the incoming exploration activity are mostly focused on the lunar day only. Here you see a list of information and parameters. They are set by Space Agency and professionals in the field for identifying key measures, key parameters to consider when planning a future experiment, and to consider also when addressing financial resources for supporting the development of facility, technology, and other things that are needed for enabling incoming missions. Now that we know we want to go to the moon, that we want to go to Mars, so the question for people in the healthcare field is, what are we supposed to do? This paper report a list of medical conditions estimated to occur in cislunar. And the information here builds on those collected on the International Space Station, which is the reference, the operational scenarios that we have as a reference right now. And they also use probabilistic risk analysis assessment models for extracting and estimating risks and likelihood of occurrence, severity, and so on and so forth. So it is important to know which are the possible medical conditions that could occur on a mission on the moon, because based on that we can understand the gaps, we can understand the mitigation strategies. For example, we know what we're supposed to do as a researcher, either in university, in companies, or in space agencies. So it's really important. This paper is really, really important. But however, there is a great limit. As I mentioned to you, all of this information builds on the astronaut population on the International Space Station. Okay, the International Space Station is in low Earth orbit, and the moon is not in low Earth orbit. It's from another side, which is far away from Earth, and that distance introduces great challenges in healthcare. Secondly, it builds on existing medical condition, so symptoms or condition that astronaut reports on the International Space Station. People will go on the moon and will stay way longer because the plans here is to move from continuous human presence on the International Space Station to a permanent human presence on the moon. So yes, people might come back from the moon, but the plan is to try to enable a long-term human life on the surface of the moon. And so the difference in the operational scenario introduced great challenges. Consequently, the data that you're seeing here in this picture builds on the astronaut population of what we know. However, there is a great possibility that it won't happen in this way, that we might encounter something or medical condition completely different, or the severity is different, the likelihood is different, the risk is different, and we have to be aware of that because the operational scenarios of lunar activities, either on cislunar or on the surface of the moon, are way different from the International Space Station. And consequently, it's an open door. We are planning something what we know, but hey, there is so many things that could happen that we don't know about. But anyway, we have to be aware and have a very open mindset, because something new is going to come up during these missions. Here you see the image of two astronauts, I must say. But the first one is Scott Kelly, which is a former astronaut that I love. He wrote an amazing book, has an amazing experience. He stayed on the International Space Station for 1 year, beside other missions. So it's an amazing reference. He's an excellent astronaut, and it's very popular, great achievement. And on the other side, here's me pretending to be an astronaut and trying to act as an astronaut. And I'm telling you in the context. When I was trying to, when the first times that I was curious about space, I really wanted to become a good engineer and trying to extract some information and try to get into the mindset of an astronaut, to try to do something that is like astronaut life. And so the way to do that is to simulate human life and to have the role and to act as a role of analog astronaut. So former astronauts like Scott Kelly and many others selected by governmental agency are way different from analog astronauts. Analog astronauts are people from the general public, from the public, for example, as myself, trying to run activity in extreme environments and trying to replicate scenarios of human life in a place that have synergies with the moon, with the Mars, and other celestial bodies. And so there are types of astronauts and there are types of missions. What Scott Kelly and others are running are space mission, crew space mission, which are organized and led by space agency. What I'm running, they're called analog mission, and they are organized by people, sometimes by entities, some other times by space agencies, some other times is a hybrid form, but they are very diverse, and sometimes their diversity is a value, introduce huge values in scientific research. Some other times depend on the study. It's a huge limitation because it limits the replicability of an experiment, and so the assessment of study. This is a definition of analog mission. An analog mission is an activity that simulates part of the complexity of a crew mission on the surface of a body. So as in modeling analog mission, trying to replicate phenomena, condition scenarios in this case, that are close to the target, which is our current space mission. However, there are some limitations that we have to deal with, like we can't replicate microgravity on the ground, we can't replicate space weather on the ground. And there are facilities that allows you to reproduce microgravity or microgravity-induced phenomena or stressors or stresses on the ground by using facilities such as parabolic flight, drop towers, and many others. But here we're dealing with people. People exposed to an environment that is considered extreme, isolated, and confined environment, because this is what a space has been defined so far. And we have people there running analog mission for a few weeks, for days, for months, for years. And so it's important to replicate the scenarios that have so many synergies with the real scenarios of the space mission. However, there are limitations that we have to be aware of. These are a few pictures taken from my personal collection. I've done several analog missions with the Royal Commander, and I organized all of them, and this is why I took experience, hands-on experience in mission planning, operations, and leadership, lots of leadership. And I was PI of many experiments that are not just dealing with healthcare, but with astronomy, with geology, with anything that we could possibly done in those environments. Those missions are taken from the Mars Desert Research Station, which is in the United States, in the Utah, and which is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my entire life. To be fair with you, it's fantastic, and I love going there, simulate all of this kind of stuff. It is, I think for you, it is important to see that you can use all of this place during winter, during time, and in both season, the environment introduce challenges that are part of the mission. So when you go there, it's not just testing a device, for example, or running a human studies. It's understanding the complexity that comes out from the mission. For example, how can the lack of food has implication on me using a device? How can my fatigue, my accumulated fatigue throughout weeks of isolation impact in my understanding of health? Or how is my mindset and my loneliness or my depression or some, so all of these feelings in impacting my creativity in dealing with technical stuff, technical maintenance. Maintenance in engineering is not very appealing as development. Okay, most of the research right now are dealing with development, investing in development of technology that are going to be used in future human exploration activities. However, there is a great need for investing in maintenance. Whenever we are going to be on the planet, on Mars, on the moon, whatever happen, whatever problem we are going to have, we got to fix them with the resources that we have on board. And this is why maintenance is key. We cannot reinvent the wheel. We have to understand how to make a material, how to adjust material, how to print material, how to recycle material, recycle resources, how the recyclement impact my life, what other natural resources needed for allowing maintenance, and will I be able to be so creative like I am right now in after, I don't know, 6 months of isolation? This is the question that are very challenging. So running analog missions does not allow you to run just and to test a device in isolation. You shall account for human factors and human performance and how they vary throughout the mission in the assessment of your design. This is why we, or myself and others, are taking part in analog mission. We voluntarily understand that there are consequences in being exposed to an isolated, extreme and confined environment, but we do that because we got, some human factors are going to manifest in certain conditions, and we need a manifestation of human factor and a specific performance that are not optimal because we are civilians, we are not training as a full astronaut, but that condition is very similar to what astronaut will be like in space. So this not optimal performance and human factors are a good mix for accounting and for validating medical technology and many other technology. However, the context and the scenarios in which the technology is being tested has a strong impact on the outcomes of the testing itself, because we can't, and I would not encourage to run an assessment or a validation test without accounting of the scenarios that offers the mission. And the reason is because analog mission are very diverse from each other. They introduce variability, and we shall account of the testing and the mission itself combined together. So they are part of the testing that can be done on the ground without the needs of being isolated and confined in an extreme environment, and those are fine. Whenever those tests are done and the technology can be considered safe, then it is nice to test it in such environments, in such analog missions, because you are going to include in the testing not optimal human performance and human factors. This is what you got to do. Human factors, a lot of human factors, medical conditions that are coming out from fatigue and from crew dynamics. That's why it's important to have a team like that in the picture with you. They are really well trained and really well led for executing a mission. Space Agency don't only investigate possible medical conditions, but it also comes in identifying what is the medical technology that we need to have on a mission to Mars, on the Moon. So here you see the levels of cares on NASA, and I strongly encourage to read the documents and possible medical equipment to bring with us. We can't bring an entire hospital on Mars. We can't bring an entire hospital on the Moon. But we can bring some devices, some medical devices, and those devices shall have specific features as identified by NASA. And it is fascinating to see that the duration of the mission requires a higher progress in technology, and specifically in medical technology. In a long-term mission, like planetary mission lasting more than 210 days, like this space mission, so Mars expedition missions, requires an autonomy which is introduced and revolutionize all the medical field. And NASA call it as autonomous medical care, and here you have a brief description. The key part is a long duration mission, like the Moon, like those on the Moon or Mars, lasting hundreds of days. They require the crew to be independent from the ground crew on Earth. And that translates into the medical field as the astronaut shall be independent and be able to do and to cope with any medical condition, medical scenarios that they could possibly encounter on the mission without the need to call Earth for help. Right now, astronauts on the International Space Station are in close contact with the ground crew. They are guided by the ground crew whenever there is a challenge or they need support. However, there is always someone that is going to help. However, in a future mission, that's not going to be the case. So any sort of technology that we come up, we develop, we are testing, we have to think that properly, to think about the worst scenarios, which is that the person that has a higher medical background or medical expertise in the crew is incapacitated during the mission and can't help the others. And so a person that have no medical experience or no medical background shall be able to help others in the crew, possible himself or herself, and the technology shall allow any astronaut and the crew to survive independently from the ground on Earth. In regards to the NASA level of cares 4 and 5, here I wrote a paper about artificial intelligence in terrestrial versus space medicine. Here you see that there is some big differences between the two, and I would not encourage or suggest to transfer artificial intelligence developed for terrestrial application to space. The human body in space undergo several processes of adaptation that occurs multi-scale in the human body. And consequently, the algorithms and or any technology that has been developed on the ground do not account of the full entire alteration that are part of the adaptation, the natural adaptation of the human body. So I would not encourage a direct transfer of technology. However, I would encourage the use of advanced algorithms and advanced technology as well, like VR, AR, for application in space, specifically for space healthcare. I think there is a business. However, if you're not very familiar with the space sector, just might check out this paper just to see how can be different from a normal fields from the normal terrestrial medicine. This is an activity that I'm currently doing as the IEEE EMBS European representative. It's a special issue under the IEEE Open Journal of Engineering in Medicine and Biology, and it's run in collaboration with the chief editor, Professor Bonello, that it's a person that I admire, it's a wonderful person. The special issue is about healthcare for space and space for healthcare. People that are in the space sector do not, invest their time and resources just to think about 4 people in space. They do that for people on the ground. And I think that the outer space its resources, that includes everything from space assets to satellites, constellation, the International Space Station, if you wish, and any other infrastructure on the Moon and Mars. They would allow for so much, R&D for people on the ground. There are opportunities that anyone should access for increasing healthcare on the ground. So transfer of technology and transfer of knowledge are key in these fields for strengthening the link between space and the ground. We don't just focus on how to make astronauts safe. We want to focus also on how to increase healthcare on Earth in a way to allow anyone on this planet that might live with different, in different societies, under different rules and with different benefits, to have access to healthcare. I think it's a must, and I really hope you're going to submit a paper by October 15th, 2022. I have no control on the deadline, but I would encourage you to submit the paper anyway. Thank you so much for watching.
Hello and happy IEEE Day, everyone. My name is Andre, and I'm the IEEE EMBS AdCom student representative. I hope you've been celebrating the IEEE Day in the most fun way possible and having a great time. I'm very excited to contribute to the call from EMBS Chapter Development Committee to raise awareness on biomedical engineering by showcasing the latest EMB research. I'll be presenting part of the work I've done for my master thesis at the Neuromuscular Physiology and Neural Interfacing Lab at FAO, my home university. So let's get started. I'd like to begin with a high-level explanation of our aim and activities at N2 Lab. We work with biosignals to try and understand the nature of the neuromuscular system, from the intention of the movement to force generation. We record from both healthy individuals and those with disorders. Our long-term goal, by gaining this understanding, is to use this knowledge to develop human-centered assistive devices, such as neuroprosthetics and exoskeletons. Our current efforts are towards helping sensory and motor complete individuals with spinal cord injuries. We are trying to interface spared motor neuron activity for movement restoration and targeted rehabilitation. We specifically try to understand the neural control of the hand because restoring hand function in tetraplegia is something that could have great impact on daily lives of those who suffer from cervical spinal cord injuries, so it has clinical relevance. The hand has great mobility and flexibility in its function, thanks to the high degrees of freedom in its movement, also capable of extremely gentle and precise movements, as well as others that require a higher force generation. We are interested in the activity of extrinsic hand muscles, so we use high-density multi-channel surface electrodes and record EMG signal. This might sound understandably counterintuitive, as in maybe it would make sense recording EMG from the forearms of healthy individuals, but as a matter of fact, we also record surface EMG from the extrinsic hand muscles of tetraplegic participants. The reason is, in recent studies, including some of the work done in our lab, posed the possibility of using spared motor unit activity below the spinal cord injury level to be used as a control signal for human-machine interfaces. And to get to the motor unit discharge patterns from the surface EMG, we use a method called decomposition. As you probably know, A motor unit consists of an alpha motor neuron and the muscle fibers it innervates. And there is one-to-one correspondence at the neuromuscular junction, meaning each axonal potential of a motor neuron corresponds to a motor unit action potential generated by the muscle fibers it innervates. And we estimate these firing patterns using blind source separation algorithms. The reason why we need this step is that the result of the decomposition reliably correlates to the motor unit recruitment, and therefore thus force development. After all, it is the direct output of the afferent control and afferent feedback from the spinal cord. So we designed a framework for the experiments we conduct now, where we combine three-dimensional hand kinematics and EMG recordings to understand the neural control of the motor units during dynamic individual hand digit flexion and extension movements at different rates of force development. We use EMG decomposition to estimate the motor unit spike trains that encode the digit movement, and we wanted to see if we could reveal different neural modules, which are estimates of the neural control on flexion or extension of the digits using dimensionality reduction. That means we have two research questions to answer here. Number one, is it possible to identify motor unit discharge timings from dynamic hand digit movements? Because similar studies focused on isometric tasks, so we wanted to see if we can find motor units that encode dynamic movements. Number two, can non-negative matrix factorization reveal the motor units that encode flexion and extension? 4 healthy individuals participated in our study and performed single-digit flexion and extension for all digits, repeated each task at 2 different frequencies for 40 seconds. And here's a sketch of the framework. On the right side, you can see a picture of a participant following a screen where we show a virtual hand model that played out a video of the predefined tasks we wanted them to perform. This way, we ensure comparable moments and frequencies across participants. And while they are performing a task, we record the moments with cameras and EMG grids simultaneously. These two signals are synchronized with the help of a microcontroller, sending the same trigger input to both camera and EMG amplifier systems. The camera frames then get fed into a deep learning model for markerless pose estimation, where we eventually get 3D hand kinematics, the coordinates of each labels of the hand. EMG decomposition yields a population of motor unit spike trains for each task. We factorize these matrices of motor unit discharges using non-negative matrix factorization, constrained to 2 components. Remember, we're trying to extract the motor units that encode flexion and extension. On the left side, you can see the labels we have for our network on the image of the hand. For this particular study, we've only used the digit tip coordinates. However, we train our pre-trained network with sufficiently large amount of manually labeled frames until we are satisfied with the 2D tracking of the labels across the whole length of the video. We then triangulate these different camera angles to get 3D coordinates of each label. The matrices we factorize with the NMF are populations of motor discharge timings identified for each task. This means the number of rows M corresponds to the number of motor units we identified, whereas the number of columns N is the length of the signal in samples. The content of each of these rows is the binary code of the discharge pattern, the value 0 for time samples where there is no firing, and 1 for when there is a firing. The feature matrix gives us the weights with which we decide the component the motor unit belongs to. Coefficient matrix, on the other hand, are the estimates of the neuromodules. To summarize the process, we start off with a synchronized high-density surface EMG and video recordings. The decomposition is a semi-automatic process, so it must first be manually inspected, and then cleared from the crosstalk and validated to make sure all the motor units we have for each task are unique firings. Then we extract neural modules using NMF and validate this using the digited kinematics. We eventually end up with motor unit discharges which are decoded according to the task and the neural module they belong to. So let's look at the results of one example task from a participant. What you see is a heat map of motor units with respect to their correlation R values to the neural modules extracted from NMF. We get these values by correlating each motor unit spike train to the neural module estimates we got from the coefficient matrix. As you can clearly see, first 3 motor units show strong positive correlation to one of the neural modules, while also showing strong negative correlation to the other. The fourth and the fifth are weakly correlated to both. Note that we still don't know which of these neural modules is flexion or extension. Here at the bottom plot, we see the neural modules plotted against each other, where there is observable biphasic pattern. When we smooth the firings of motor units that belong to these components, they also show the same pattern. These both plots, by the way, belong to the same example task from the previous slide, so you can still notice what we have seen on the previous slide where motor unit 1 and motor unit 3 belong to opposite neural modules. And what we are looking at right now is the raster plot of the motor units superimposed with the digit tip kinematics. This is where everything gets much clearer. The red line corresponds to the position of the digit tip, and each time the wave goes up, that's a digit extension, and it's flexion for when the wave goes down. So we get to see here where the neural activity of these motor units lie. Notice the 2 motor units that are weakly correlated to both components, the fourth and the fifth ones, have monotonic activity throughout the signal, while the ones who have strong positive correlation to one of the modules, while also showing strong negative correlation to the other, have task-modulated activity. We came to observe the same trend on all the motor units identified for all the tasks from all the participants. Most of the motor units encoded at least one of the neural modules. In conclusion, the developed framework allowed us to study the neural control of the motor units during dynamic flexion and extension movement of the digits. And we managed to also use a combination of decomposition and factorization to extract neural modules. The third group of motor units, which were weakly correlated to both components, likely encode the postural control of the hand, because as we have seen on the raster plot, they did have monotonic firing patterns throughout the signal. We're investigating this further with a larger dataset. I'd like to thank my colleagues at the N² lab for their contribution to this work, and the Chapter Development Committee for opening calls to IEEE Day presentations and giving us the platform to present ourselves. Please feel free to get in touch with me for any questions about this presentation. Have a fantastic IEEE Day.
Hello everyone, I am very happy to be part of this exciting event, the EMBS Chapter's Torch Relay Public Webinar, organized by the Chapter Development Committee on the occasion of the IEEE Day on October 4th. The topic of my presentation is exploring cardiovascular mechanics using ultrasound, a topic closely related to my research focus, which lies on the application of advanced mathematical methods to assess aspects of cardiovascular function from ultrasound imaging. This topic falls under the EMBS theme on biomedical imaging and image processing, while it is also associated with cardiovascular systems engineering and diagnostic systems and technologies. The term cardiovascular mechanics itself refers to the assessment of the mechanical properties of the heart and the blood vessels. That is, the assessment of parameters such as the blood pressure and the blood flow velocity, as well as tissue displacements, which are the result of blood pressure and flow, and also strains and stiffness, which can be derived from displacements. These phenomena are due to the inherent movement of the heart, which expands and contracts continuously with every cardiac cycle. As a result of this, a fundamental characteristic of these parameters is their temporal variability and periodicity. They also have spatial variability because they change along the different locations of the cardiovascular system. Assessment of cardiovascular mechanics is important because mechanical properties carry valuable information about the complex function of the heart and the vessels, information which is useful not only in the healthy state so as to characterize normal patterns of function, but also for describing alterations due to aging, following interventions, or in the presence of disease. Ultrasound imaging is ideally suited to assess cardiovascular mechanics as it allows real-time imaging of the inherent cardiovascular motion. Given its additional advantages, namely low cost, non-invasiveness, and use of non-ionizing radiation, ultrasound is widely used for screening and monitoring cardiovascular disorders. Ultrasound imaging relies on the transmission of high-frequency sound from a transducer, that is, sound with frequency higher than the audible range, the interaction of the sound with the interrogated tissue, which mostly includes reflection and scattering, and finally, reception of sound waves by the same transducer. The returned sound waves, or echoes, are transformed into images with special software based on the time it took them to return to the transducer. The main ultrasound modalities that can be used to assess cardiovascular mechanical properties include B-mode, or brightness mode, which allows assessment of tissue motion, Doppler for estimation of blood flow velocity, and elastography for mapping of tissue strains and stiffness. These different modalities interrogate different aspects of the mechanical phenomena taking place in the two main tissues of the cardiovascular system, namely vessel wall tissue and blood. The physical principle of B-mode ultrasound imaging relies on mapping the intensities of reflected echoes, that is, of ultrasound waves, after they have interacted with tissue. The tissue properties that can be assessed with B-mode ultrasound include motion from sequences of images, videos, while tissue dimensions and morphology can also be estimated from single static images. Cross-correlation is commonly used to estimate tissue motion from sequences of images. This algorithm relies on searching each image in a sequence for a region of interest that is similar to a selected region in the first image of the sequence. Using this procedure, one can obtain temporal waveforms of displacements along the two dimensions in an image over one or more cardiac cycles. In this example, we can see the radial and the longitudinal displacements of a region in the wall of the carotid artery, the artery that takes blood to the brain, which are characterized by the expected periodic pattern which follows the frequency of heart movement. Based on such waveforms, various mechanical phenomena can be studied. By interrogating motion in two directions, we can study anisotropy, which refers to the differences in mechanical properties along different directions. In the same line of investigating the longitudinal component of motion, we can estimate shear strain, a term used to describe the relative displacements, the sliding of adjacent wall layers because of opposing forces applied in a direction parallel to the arterial wall. As we can see in this example in the carotid artery, the shear strain waveform, shown with a solid line, has a periodic pattern following the periodicity of the arterial diameter, shown with a dashed line. Using similar procedures, one can assess the movement of the atheromatous plaque, which is a focal lesion of the arterial wall caused by the accumulation of cholesterol and other lipid material, and is responsible for cerebrovascular events such as strokes. In this example, the plaque moves with respect to the adjacent wall, while also it exhibits some inherent movement with its top surface moving periodically towards and away from its bottom surface, following again the heart movement. Such intraplaque movement can also be observed by mapping the tissue displacements over the top and bottom boundaries of the plaque for a specific point of the cardiac cycle. As we can see in these examples, the symptomatic plaque, the plaque that has caused a stroke, presents a less uniform distribution of motion amplitudes compared to the asymptomatic, more innocent case. The inhomogeneity of the movement of the diseased arterial wall can be quantified by estimating phase differences between displacement waveforms of different tissue areas. Similar to the previous observations, and as we can see in the distributions of phase differences along the boundaries of the plaque, they are more uniformly distributed in the asymptomatic low-risk case. Multiple metrics can be derived from the waveforms representing the previously described mechanical phenomena and can be collectively termed kinematic indices. Examples of such indices include the mean values of tissue displacements during the cardiac cycle or over a specific tissue area. Such metrics can be input in a computerized tool aiming to support disease diagnosis or in an integrated system along with other clinical information towards optimizing risk stratification and disease management. Elastography is another major modality suitable for investigating cardiovascular mechanics, which is currently finding its way into clinical practice. The conventional technique, strain elastography, depicts tissue deformations due to internal stimuli, that is, due to the movement of heart and vessels. A more recent technique relies on the generation of a shear wave and the estimation of the shear wave speed, which is directly related to the tissue stiffness. The higher the speed, the stiffer the tissue. Strain elastography relies on the application of a motion tracking algorithm similar to those used in B-mode image analysis and the generation of an image mapping the tissue deformation between two different time points. As we can see in this example from an intravascular ultrasound of the coronary artery. A color code is then used to represent the amplitude of the resulting tissue strain. The higher the strain, the more elastic the underlying tissue. These are two examples of elastography images in atherosclerotic carotid arteries. One is derived from a vulnerable high-risk plaque which presents areas of high strain, the red areas, corresponding to hemorrhagic content as confirmed by magnetic resonance imaging, while low strain areas are represented by yellow and light blue colors and indicate calcified tissue. The other case corresponds to a stable, low-risk plaque, which is dominated by low strain areas corresponding to calcification, again as confirmed by MRI. Shear wave elastography relies on the generation of a shear wave by remote acoustic palpation and its acquisition by ultrafast imaging. These images, which are taken from the first report on this technique, show the propagation of the wave at different times after the initiation of the push along the carotid artery wall of the volunteer. This is an example of elastography-based quantitative stiffness assessment of the carotid artery and the corresponding B-mode image, with red areas corresponding to high values of the shear wave speed and therefore increased stiffness. Doppler ultrasound is targeted at assessing blood flow properties. Its physical principle relies on a change of the sound frequency when there is a relative movement between the sound source and the target. Using color and spectral Doppler, the direction and velocity of blood flow can be estimated, which are commonly used for scoring arterial wall lesions. Vector flow imaging is a recently introduced technique relying on an extension of the conventional Doppler method. Specifically, it allows the blood flow vectors to be mapped on the entire imaged blood area. As we can see on this image of a vessel and its branches, with vector flow imaging, we can view blood flowing towards the branches at systole as the blood travels from the heart towards the arteries, and at opposite directions at diastole as the blood travels back to the heart. Recent developments in electronics and communications have allowed to capture ultrasound data using wearable devices. A necklace or a patch, which can be used to provide D-mode images and flow velocity signals, respectively, show promise for novel ways of assessing cardiovascular mechanics, for example, for continuous monitoring or even beyond the limits of the hospital. In conclusion, complex phenomena involved in cardiovascular mechanics can be non-invasively assessed with ultrasound imaging and provide new knowledge about the function of the heart and the vessels in health and disease. The clinical usefulness of such features remains to be confirmed through appropriately designed clinical trials, which is the necessary next step in this line of work. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. I will be happy to respond to your comments or questions in my email.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to meet with you all today to talk about our current research and up-to-date research results. Also, it's a very special day to celebrate the IEEE Day in this day. So my name is Hisham Al-Mokkit. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Mechatronics Engineering at the German-Jordanian University. So a bit about myself. I have got my PhD degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor in 2015. Then I also worked there for 1 more year as a postdoctoral research fellow. After that, I joined the German-Jordanian University as an assistant professor, which later I was promoted to the rank of associate professor in 2020. I'm currently a senior IEEE member and also the chair of the EMBS chapter in Jordan since 2020. So today we will be talking about the using deep learning methods with sleep medicine. Of course, this is a very big area of research. So we will focus on the use of deep learning methods. We will focus about the use of deep learning methods for automated detection of sleep apnea using single channel respiration signals. So sleep apnea, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine defines sleep apnea as the most common sleep-related breathing disorder. But at first, what is sleep apnea? So sleep apnea is characterized by a transient or complete cessation of breathing for at least 10 seconds during sleep. So whenever you have a cessation in breathing for 10 seconds or more, then this is called sleep apneic event. And sleep apnea events are categorized into 3 categories. We have obstructive sleep apnea, central apnea, and mixed apnea. So when the cessation of breathing is caused by a collapse in the airway, look at this picture here. So if there is a collapse or restriction in the upper airway, so this will cause an obstructive sleep apnea, and this is the characteristic of an obstructive sleep apnea. On the other hand, central sleep apnea is a neurological disorder in which patient loses the respiratory effort. So there is no effort to breathe by the patient, and the upper airway is not necessarily blocked. The mixed apnea gets both obstructive and central apnea. So, and often a central apneic event starts with the loss of the respiratory effort, and then this is followed by an upper airway collapse, and this what characterizes a mixed apnea event. So obstructive sleep apnea is the most common event, and we have more than 300 million people affected with this disorder. So the gold standard for evaluating sleep is the pulsinogram, or what is called the sleep study. So any patient who would like to get evaluated for his sleep goes to a sleep lab, and in a sleep lab he spent an overnight, and then in this night he is hooked up to several sensors and several equipment so that he can get all his body functions monitored during sleep. So a pulsinogram normally includes the ECG signal to get to monitor the heart activity. It has also the EEG signal, EEG signals, different EEG signals to get the brain activity. It has also the EMG to monitor the muscles response, the EOG to monitor eyes movement. It also captures the respiration through different sources of respiration signals. It also monitors the oxygen saturation in the blood. So as you can see, the problem with the PSG that you need a dedicated lab to do this kind of experiment. And normally this is uncomfortable for patients because you need to be hooked up for a lot of sensors and a lot of equipment. And after the PSG is completed, you normally need a clinician to revise and review all of the records, all of the signal recorded, so that he can detect, he can annotate the problems that the patient have during sleep. And as you can see, this is something that is not available in low resource settings, and it's normally expensive, and normally you need to wait a lot of time to get such an appointment. So with these limitations, there has been a good effort in order to develop automated sleep apnea detection methods in which we use a limited subset of the PSG signals. And these methods were commonly based on classical machine learning theory, in which we always derive handcrafted features. So using some signal analysis, signal processing techniques, we derive some features, then we optimize these features, and then finally we apply these features into a classification model in order to classify between normal and apneic events in order to detect these apnea events automatically without the need for a clinical expert to annotate the PSG signals as what is done previously. Now, majority of these methods that have been performed, majority of these methods that have been presented, they focus on the ECG signals. There are really much less studies that consider the single channel respiration signals. So normally, people who use respiration signals try to get more than one source in order to increase the accuracy of the detection. But using a single channel respiration signal is not that much used, although it's really very favorable because, as you know, if we would like to get sleep apnea detection out of the sleep lab, it's always worth it if we can decrease the number of channels involved with this detection. Now, in terms of PSG, we have three sources for respiration, three sources for respiration monitoring in the pulsinogram. So the first source is the oronasal airflow signal, which is a thermal flow based signal, thermal flow based sensor to detect respiration. And this is the primary source for detecting sleep apneas as defined by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. We have the nasal pressure signal, which is a cannula transducer, cannula sensor that is connected to a pressure transducer. This is the second source for measuring respiration. The third source can be using the movement sensors that are placed around the abdomen or the thorax. so that these sensors normally detect the change in volume during respiration in order to give us an indirect source for respiration. So what is the problem that we are tackling in this research? So the research gap that all the respiratory-based methods, they normally focus heavily on the handcrafted features and the respiratory source analyzed. As we have mentioned, we have three sources for respiration. It is either airflow or oronasal airflow, the thermal sensor-based signal, or the nasal pressure signal, or the respiratory built or the respiratory movement sensor that is normally recorded using a belt. So depending on this method, there are different, depending on the measurement method, there are different algorithms, and normally the algorithms that are derived from one source are not able to be used with the second source. And there is a heavy dependence on the features that are derived from these signals. And this all in all makes the problem of detecting sleep apneic events using respiration is not really reliable. And there has been a lot of research on trying to validate these methods on different sources. So, sorry. So in this approach, in this research, we would like to develop an end-to-end deep learning framework, recurrent neural network deep learning framework, so that we can do automatic feature extraction. We don't want to rely on the handcrafted features. We want to do automatic feature extraction. And then after that, we do classification for apneic events. And then finally, we would like to evaluate the performance on the different sources of respirations, because we would like to get some sort of universal modeling approach that can work with all respiratory sources. So we started with a data set of 17 patients. They have all different types of apnea events, obstructive, central, and mixed apnea. And they have also measurements from the oronasal airflow signal, from the nasal pressure signal, and also from the builds of the respiratory inductance plethysmography from the abdomen and the thoracic sources. So in terms of data pre-processing, we have resampled all the signals at 32 Hertz so that we could work with them equally, because not all of the signals are sampled with the same sampling frequency. And we also applied a low-pass filter with a cutoff frequency of 0.5 Hertz. Then we segmented this data set into 10 seconds, windows of 10 seconds duration. And if you can notice, we used a 10 second for segmentation, because this is the minimum criterion to score an apneic event. So you need to have cessation in breathing for 10 seconds in order to say that this is an apneic event or no. And as a typical artificial intelligence machine learning problem, we divided our data into 80% for training and 20% for testing and evaluation. One of the things that, one of the problems that always face people who do research in sleep apnea and in general healthcare, that there is a heavy class imbalance between the apneic events and the normal events, because as you can know, the normal breathing is majority of the breathing, and the sleep apneic events is normally a number of events that happen during night. So we have a class imbalance, and for our data set, the apneic events were around 1/4 the normal events. So and we solved this problem using oversampling of the minority class, or oversampling of the apnea class. Now, for recurrent neural networks, is the specific type of neural networks that can be applied with signals that have correlation with its measurements over time. So it's ideal to extract temporal features. Now, one of the problems with recurrent neural networks is that vanishing or the exploding gradient that makes a limitation over the recurrent neural network to be able to learn dependencies over long time series. So that's why there were some variants that have been proposed. One is the long short-term memory network, and the other one is the bidirectional long short-term memory, or BiLSTM. Now these variants, they are equipped with the gating mechanism, and they are much able to characterize the correlation over short time and long time as well. So we use two detection scenarios in our problem. So we would like to get an end-to-end approach. But by end-to-end, I mean that we would like just to input the segment of the respiration to the system, and then at the end we would like to get the class if this is a normal respiration or apneic event, and we don't want to do any type of handcrafted feature extraction, and that's why we call this approach an end-to-end deep learning approach. So we use two scenarios. The first one is an LSTM based scenario, and the second one is a bidirectional LSTM. So LSTM, or long short-term memory, it uses long and short-term memory detection in its memory cells, and it's equipped with gates, and this is what makes it much more reliable than the classical vanilla RNNs. Now, so in this scenario, we put a layer of LSTM, and then another layer of LSTM, and then we used a fully connected layer to do the classification, followed by a softmax layer in order to give us either the segment is normal or apneic. So what we do is that we input the segment, the 10-second segment of respiration to this deep learning network, and then at the end we would like to get the class. So we use the design scenario. We use two layers of LSTM. Also, we added a dropout layer in order to decrease the likelihood to see overfitting. So we added dropout layers after the LSTM layers, and then we compiled all this deep learning model, and we tested over the three different respiration signals that I mentioned previously. Now, the second scenario is that it's the same as the first scenario. It's only that we replaced the LSTM cell with a BiLSTM cell. So the BiLSTM, the bidirectional long short-term memory cell, is similar to the long short-term memory cell, but it has a major difference. So the long short-term memory cell is able to process time series and forward time. The bidirectional long short-term memory is able to process the time series in forward and in backward. So we can detect. So since we have all these signals recorded retrospectively, so we are able to analyze them in forward path and in backward path, and this is why we use the bidirectional long short-term memory cell to replace the LSTM cell in the respective layers. After we have, these two scenarios were evaluated on the three respiration signals involved in this study. And as you can see, first we can look at the long short-term memory-based results. And as you can see, we have achieved using a simple recurrent neural network model that does not use any handcrafted features. We were able to achieve generally high sensitivity results using the long short-term memory scenario. Now, as you can see, the nasal pressure signal achieved the highest sensitivity. By TPR, we mean the true positive rate or the recall. So the highest recall or the highest true positive rate is 90%, and has been achieved using the nasal pressure signal. Now we also get lower generally true positive rates with the abdominal respiratory effort signal and the oronasal airflow signal. But in general, these are on a higher side of recalls. We also get some. We got also the highest positive predictive value or highest precision with the nasal pressure signal. As you can see, there are some decrease in the precision, and this is normal due to the use of imbalanced data. And this is a natural result of the imbalance of the class imbalance in this data set. But as you can see, the area under classification, the area under receiver operating characteristic curves is all high, and as you can see, it gets over 90% with the nasal pressure signal. And this is also promising in terms of deploying this algorithm into a home-based screening method for sleep apnea. Now, if we compare this with the bidirectional long short-term memory, as you can see, using LSTM or using the bidirectional LSTM, we still get the nasal pressure, nasal pressure signal to achieve the highest detection accuracies. But as you can see, there was no significant change in going from LSTM to bi-LSTM with the nasal pressure signal. Normally, the metrics, the performance metrics, are generally the same. There are not much significant change in these metrics, but we can notice that there was significant increase in the performance metrics with the other two signals, the abdominal and the flow and the oronasal airflow thermal based signal. And as you can see, for example, the abdominal signal, we were able to increase the true positive rate significantly, the true negative rate significantly, and as well as the accuracy significantly. Also, the positive predictive value is now very close to the one achieved with the nasal pressure using the bidirectional LSTM. And this is kind of provides us, this is very promising because using the abdominal signal is very convenient for using this kind of detection algorithm in an invasive way or using a wearable system. You know, this is also a plot of the receiver operating characteristic curve. And as you can see, the highest classification was achieved with the nasal pressure signal, but using the bi-LSTM was able to increase significantly the area under ROC curve for both the abdominal and the flow TH airflow signal. So in conclusion, so in this study, we used deep recurrent neural networks in automatic detection of apneic events using signal respiratory signal, using signal respiratory signal. We tested two detection scenarios. One is an LSTM based and the other one is a bi-LSTM based. We evaluated our system on 3 different respiratory signals. The bi-LSTM model showed a significant improvement over the LSTM based model when using the flow TH and the abdominal signal. And as I said before, the abdominal signal provides an indirect access to respiratory flow, and this can be used to develop further the proposed detection system into a wearable system. At the end, I would like to acknowledge the research team, and here you can go to the full paper if you would like to get more details about this study. I would like also to acknowledge the efforts from the IEEE EMBS Chapter Development Committee, of which I am a member as well. And I also would like to acknowledge the funding from the JGU Deanship of Research. And this is my email. I would be very happy to receive any questions regarding this talk or regarding any future collaborations. And I would like to thank you for attending this virtual lecture, and I hope that we could continue to present our work in the future. Thank you all.